All right, we are almost there. Okay. It looks like it's recording, and here we go. All right, so what I want to talk about with you for just the next hour or so is this whole world of what's now called the microbiome. For my partner in crime there and husband, David Montgomery, who's a geologist by way of his background, and my background is in biology. We really came to see the world of microbiomes, both that of the green body of a plant and even the human body, as something that we call the hidden half of nature. And so that's how we came up with the title for our book. And just to give you a little context, we call this part of the Dirt trilogy. The hidden half is the middle book. And on either side of it, the one that really kicked off the hidden half of nature is a book called Dirt, The Erosion of Civilizations. David wrote that about 10 years ago. And if you're at all into history and civilizations and things of that nature, my guess is you would really like that book. And then came along the hidden half, the middle book. The last book is called Growing a Revolution. And that is really about applying all of this microbiome science and other things that we know about soil and soil life to this whole endeavor of agriculture, this grand human thing that's been going on for about 10,000 years, and how vitally important it is to our health and environmental health as well, that we start paying a lot more attention to the soil. So with that sort of short intro, I'm going to hop right away into the hidden half of nature. And where this all started was when we got our home in Seattle. This is some years ago. One of the things that really drew us to the house was this very large side yard. And I know you all out in Kitsap or in a rural setting, and you're like, oh, geez, that thing's so tiny. Well, how could they ever do anything there? Well, by city standards, it was a big chunk of ground. And some people would, maybe not around here, but if I do a talk and say somewhere like the Southwest, they look at this and they think, wow, that's so green and verdant and wonderful. Well, the fact of the matter is that this is also pretty boring. It's not very interesting. There's only the lawn there. And also for anybody who has a garden, and when you've had one for long enough, you begin to think about, why do I like, this spot in the garden versus that other spot for just, hanging out? Where do you put a table? Where do you put a chair? And so as you can see, what we started with here, there was no comfort. There's just nothing there. So that really sort of set my mind ablaze. And I began scheming and dreaming about what we could do with that very large side yard. And these were back in the days before you really had much in the way of computer stuff to be able to visualize things. And I kind of like this approach anyway. I'm really sort of a tangible, tactile person. And so I like taking the photographs and cutting them up and making montages and getting my Sharpie out and doing various kinds of, garden design things on those photographs. The funny thing is, you do that enough and then your spouse walks into the room and makes comments like, are you doing a ransom note for some botanist or something? So anyway, that's where all of this can lead. And also, when you're new to a piece of ground, you don't have a lot to rely on as far as how things work. Which way's the sun coming from? What about wind? What about the noise of neighbors? What about the noise of a street or this or that or the other? So we spent a good deal of time, especially me, just sort of thinking about how is this all going to come together? And so a while after all of that, and this is really embarrassing to say, I wish I could see your faces right now, because the one thing that the biologist and the geologist husband did not check out thoroughly enough was our soil. Look at this. Does this look like my dream dirt? No, this was exactly the kind of dirt that would be dashing my dreams. It had very little in the way of organic matter. Had a nice layer of glacial till down, not too far though, but that's pretty much like concrete. So here we were, and I'm thinking, you're looking at this going, they're going to grow a garden on that? Well, we got caught in kind of a bad time of year, because this photo happened to be taken in sort of mid to late August. You know how it goes with contractors. They were late, we were late. There were a number of plants, you can't see them in this slide, they're around the corner, that had been in their pots for way too long, and they absolutely needed to get into the ground. And so in they went. And what I realized in planting those plants and thinking about what are we going to do with the state of this dirt? It's dirt, it's not soil. And that is what I call this whole adventure that I am still on many years later. And I call it the Organic Matter Chronicles. And I have also a bad case of plant lust. So I'd blown the entire budget that we'd set aside to do the garden on all the plants, right? Because that's the stuff you can see. And that's what superficially, at least many of us think a garden is about. It's all these great plants on top of the ground. So there was no money to be buying compost and all of this other stuff. So I began looking around the neighborhood for things that were cheap or free. And I began hauling it home because I was going to put it in my wheelbarrow after I painted the flames on it, mind you, and mix it all up into mulches, because I had done enough gardening that I knew how important organic matter was. I didn't exactly know everything that was happening to it, but I would observe that after, several months of say a hefty application of compost or something like that, plants would respond. They'd look better, problems would clear up. So I began collecting things. And this is just a shot to show you the types of things I was collecting. I'll let you read down there along the bottom of the slide what some of these materials are. When you see an N there, N like in Nancy, that just means that's a really good source of nitrogen. And then when you see a C down there, that just means that's a really good source of carbon. And the other things are kind of a mix of carbon and nitrogen. And I'm no compost expert, but in general, you want to have more carbon than nitrogen. And the reason for that is that it just really kickstarts the decomposition process. When you mix all of these materials together, you want to have enough nitrogen that it gets stuff going, but you don't want too much nitrogen, because it can speed it up a lot, and it can either get, depending on that source of nitrogen, smelly or yucky or something. So you're looking for this kind of Goldilocks level of decomposition, because then all the nutrients that are in this stuff, they're moving out of, say, the coffee ground or the leaf or the pine needle or the whatever. They're moving out of that sort of type of organic matter into different forms into the soil that through a variety of means become either broken down or solubilized somehow, and turned into forms that then, of course, a plant could take up. So these were just some of the things I was collecting early on, and I wanted to show you. So here is an actual mulch mix that I am making. This is stuff that's collected really early in the summer. And that's why you see all this green stuff. So I've been let's see, there's sort of a part of a fern frond. This is some kind of a dogwood leaf. We got a maple leaf from one of the trees. This dark green stuff is my hinoki. And the neighbor was so nice. She gave me these hydrangea bouquet, and I enjoyed that for a while. Then it was time to turn it into a mulch mix. And what I really like about my mulch mixes is the very first item that's listed here, and that is the wood chips. Wood chips are really great substrate for saprophytic fungi. And in the context of this mix, they're going to last way longer than anything else. And so I like my mulch mix to do a couple things. I like it to keep weeds down from punching up from any seeds, germinating, but I also like it to break down and pass all those nutrients onto the plants. Here where that arrow is, that's our subsoil. That's the stuff that we started with. It's that cruddy stuff I showed you just a few slides and color, and there's not much organic matter. The top here is one of my that has really begun to break down. And what you see there is the top layer of organic matter that the mulch mix has broken down and has begun feeding the soil. And what was really interesting about all of these mulch mixes is how quickly it contributed organic matter to the soil. This is after probably maybe 4 or 5 years. And I was getting, on the nicest beds, like probably 1.5 to 2 inches of organic matter. And the plants were growing like crazy. I mean, I don't use any fertilizer at all. The plants in our garden are purely fed on this combination of organic matter and some other things that I'll get to in a bit. And so if all that's going on below ground, what's going on above ground? This is a shot of the garden. And when we talk with farmers at farming conferences, I often tease them and I tell them, hey, I have crops too. It's not corn or soybeans or vegetables. It's all of these other plants, these plants that lend vibrancy and beauty and help make the garden a comfortable place, and even plants that feed us and plants that are gorgeous as well. I want to just let you know too, like, how much did we actually change the soil? David and I wondered that. And about, I think maybe probably 5 years ago or so, we had a soil scientist come over and we collected samples from a number of different places in the garden. And then we measured organic matter. And once you measure organic matter, you also know how much carbon is in the soil. And why is it interesting to know how much carbon is in the soil? Because of this problem of climate change. And through various means, in the last 150, 200 plus years, an awful lot of carbon from numerous different sources has gone up into the atmosphere where it's wreaking havoc. And one of the biggest sources of carbon is the soil. When you plow soil or disturb soil, that carbon leaves the soil and goes up into the atmosphere. So what there's really pretty big potential to do is to pull that carbon back out of the atmosphere. First, it heads into a living plant, but then that living plant eventually dies and decays, and that organic matter drops back down into the soil, and it can be held there in reserve. And so the soil, the light colored soil there, that was from a part of the garden that I never mulched. So that's kind of our control. That's about 1% carbon in that soil. That dark colored soil in Dave's other hand, that is out of our veg beds. And I'll just sort of run through how much carbon we've been able to stash in our soil through this process of mulching, as well as growing basically life in the soil. Because carbon is not just in dead things, it's in living things. So when you think about pulling carbon back out of the atmosphere, there's a number of places to stash it. And one of those big places is life, the life of the soil. So that's about 1%, that very lightest colored soil. we did this kind of crazy thing with the lawn where there's some actual grass seed in there, but there's also clover and this English daisy and a couple other things that are not really showing up here. But the point of all this is to say that in this lawn area, it was about 4% carbon. So that was pretty good. And I mentioned flowers and beautiful things to look at in those lily stalks that I'd mentioned earlier before I started, that make great sort of bird perches later on in the year. These perennial beds, they held about 9% carbon, and the creme de la creme of all, the place that held the most carbon in our garden was the veg bed. And part of the reason for this is these are vegetables. This is like a high production area of the garden. I really want these. I really want to supercharge these plants. We have a relatively short growing season. We want to eat this stuff. So I had really loaded up the veg beds with two things: worm compost, the worm poop, and also with some biochar. So this is a kind of mulch. I don't really mulch the veg beds the same as I do the other beds, because I'm looking for material that can pretty quickly get down into the soil microbiome, feed them, and then they're the ones who end up feeding the plants. So this is really something most agricultural soils, like somewhere in the Midwest that has really, really nice soils, before they were all plowed up and so on and so forth, their carbon levels were, let's say in a really nice prairie soil, I don't know, maybe between like, I don't know, 6, 7, 8%, maybe higher in some places. Now, where it's all been just continuously plowed up, most agricultural soils are in around the 1% range. So that's like the soil that we started with. But in not that long a time period, we were able to increase the carbon quite a bit just through all of this mulching and feeding soil life. And what I think about, this is a cool project here. This is my living fence. And if you all know about our native dogwood shrub, so not the tree, this is the native dogwood shrub, really flexible, twisty stems and branches. I found this neat idea. I stole it. You steal all good ideas, right? Some English gardening book was talking about a living fence, and they had used willow, and they wove this fence. And in the growing season, it leaves out, and so it forms this sort of green wall. And I really liked the idea of this because I have all of my piles of organic matter and pots, and you know all the stuff that you need to have around for a garden, and it's not very nice to look at most of the time. So I stash it behind the living fence, and in the spring and summer it leaves out and we never ever see it. And so when I'm back behind the living fence, which is this shot, and I'm looking back down the long axis of the garden back out toward the street, I love the way that it creates these frames and these pictures, because it makes me realize how different the garden is today from what we started with, all that dead dirt. And this led me to sort of think about, there's this newer concept that is coming out of the farming and agricultural world about regenerative practices. And regenerative is kind of a mouthful of a word. Maybe Kristen can tell us probably the even longer word in German for regenerative. And in any event, there's this whole notion going around that maybe the soil and maybe agriculture, farming, and gardening could be a regenerative thing, where instead of being a degenerative thing where things are basically getting worse and worse and worse, what if we can turn that around and make things better and better and better? So this is the whole idea behind regenerative practices. And it also gets you to thinking, what does that term regenerative really, really mean? And that's where you go to the dictionary And there's that first definition, a bit annoying because it's using that word that you're trying to figure out. What does it mean, regenerating? The second definition, I will definitely buy this. I think all of us have probably at some point in our lives spent time out in the garden and felt better after we've been out there. There's a sense of renewal or revival, or something is happening out there in a good way most of the time. But this is the part of the definition that really kind of knocked my socks off. And the reason is for that is this very last part of that definition. It's a normal process. And it's like, of course it is. That's right. Think about what happens in a forest or any sort of natural ecosystem that hasn't been really, disturbed. These plants are growing, they're shedding their dead parts. Those dead parts become food for something else. And it spins this whole regenerative cycle. And that is normal, I think, is a really powerful way to think about how we bring soil back to life, how we think about the health and well-being of a garden, of a farm, and really how it's all connected. And I like to say in sort of this journey that I'm still on, and I know it might look like I did a lot of work out in the garden, and I did, right? I was getting all this organic matter and mixing it up and layering it on the soil. And I'll return to that. I just want to say one more thing about the layering. I actually had intended to dig all of that mulch into the soil. And then, you know how it goes in a garden. There's things you intend to do, and there's things you don't have time to do. And what happened with me is, all of these plants were getting into the ground that very first time late in the summer. And I was spending a lot of time either moving the plants around or watering the plants or thinking about the plants. And I never ever did get around to digging the mulch in. And I still never have, because I layered it on. And then 6 months later, I went back out there and I'm like, I don't think I do need to dig this in, because it looks like that layer that's right next to the soil, it was already decaying. And I thought, okay, I'll layer some more mulch on and see what happens. And what was happening is that grinders like this earthworm and other larger forms of soil life that you can see, insects like beetles and other things, they're the ones who take the first run at the organic matter and begin to physically, break it down into smaller and smaller bits, which makes it available for organisms that are a bit smaller. And so this is just various types of creatures that live in the soil. Most are, there's some spider relatives in there. They're all basically insects of one sort or another, and they're small. If you have a really good eye, you can probably see some of these things, especially if you know what you're looking for, but they're tiny. And this is the other reason that it's really important to think about how much we disturb the soil, because the minute you run a plow through soil or a rototiller, as we gardeners are prone to do, or even really digging around with a shovel or something like that, somebody's getting injured or maimed or killed by that. So you want to minimize that as much as possible. And then we get down to some of the very, very tiniest. And up here on the upper left of the screen, that's a clump of bacteria. And they are probably the most common member of the root microbiome. So when I say microbiome, all I'm referring to is the community of microorganisms that cohabitate and basically form relationships with one another. And they also form, as a community, a symbiotic relationship with their plant host. And when it comes to the botanical world, most of the plant microbiome is below ground. It's associating with the roots of a plant. And speaking of roots, this green thing over here on the right-hand side, that is a root hair. And so this is the teeniest, tiniest part of a root. And what is going on here, these spherical objects, these are spores of mycorrhizal fungi, and they're hyphae that are just coating and swathing that root hair all over. I mean, look at that, right? So this tells you that a couple things. There's a lot of microorganisms in a normal and a healthy soil, and they're supposed to be there. And I'll get into in just a little bit some of the things that they do. Down here, this is just a nematode. They are a really important part of the soil food web, and they will hoover up and chow down on bacteria like nobody's business. There are, of course, some pathogenic nematodes, but nematodes as a whole are a really diverse group. And what does any animal do when it's eating things? It poops stuff out the other end. And what's neat about the bacteria eating nematodes is they're pooping out basically a whole lot of nitrogen as a consequence of eating all of those bacteria right into the soil, right around the plant's roots, which is where we all need it. We don't want all that nitrogen running off into the streams and rivers, you know, or directly into the sound or anything like that. We want it in the soil. We want it to be in the body of a plant. And then there's just another sort of micro chewer chomper type down there. And when you put all of this together, all of these different organisms, all of this biodiversity that is a part of the soil, you get the soil food web. And look who we have, you know, it's a big member of that is the mycorrhizal fungi. And what's interesting, you know, we call this whole collection of life underground various things. You know, at one time it was soil food web was sort of the name of the day for all of that. And then we came up with the root microbiome. But basically what you have here is this community that is, it is probably the grandest and one of the oldest examples of symbioses that we know of in biology. And the relationship, and the evolution, especially the evolutionary relationships between soil life and plants way predates anything that's going on between plants and their above ground pollinators. We usually think of, that's usually the typical example of coevolution between plants and animals is, you know, the butterfly or the hummingbird comes in and it's a pollinator, and plants evolved flowers to draw these pollinators, and that's the narrative that we get. And we rarely hear about the much older, just as nuanced, just as complicated, and just as important coevolutionary relationships below ground. And I think you fungi people will like this, because what we know about the evolution of plants, and this goes back some 400 million years ago, the first plants lived in these really watery, kind of aquatic-y type environments, and they came onto land, but they were these little kind of stick things. They weren't these big woody trees, and they didn't even have much in the way of leaf biomass, and certainly nothing like a flower. But what they had were their roots. And so here they are getting up onto land. They need to hold themselves up. So that was sort of the first order of business. The water had sort of fulfilled that role, you know, when they lived in water, but on land, you got to hold yourself up. So hence roots head into the soil, and the fungi and bacteria were ready and waiting. And so the neat thing about a plant, I'll get into this, is that they're supplying some food of their own to the soil microbiota. And that's where I want to take you now, to a place, a special place beneath our feet. And that place is called the Rhizosphere. And when all the Rhizosphere is it's this halo-like zone all around the root system of a plant. Just think of it like that, like a halo. It follows an outline around each and every root and root hair. And in this image here on the right, I mean, look at the biomass below ground compared to the biomass above ground. This is a puny little pine seedling, but boy, is it busy below ground with its rhizosphere. And part of what really, the thing that makes the rhizosphere tick, it's sort of the juice that makes everything go, are compounds called exudates. And what plants do with their monopoly on the sunshine is they're photosynthesizing like crazy, right? They're the only things that can photosynthesize. Nobody, we can't do anything with all of that sunshine, at least in terms of making energy or food or anything like that, but plants can. So they manufacture these exudates through sunshine and water and carbon, and they release these exudates into the soil out of their roots. And what are these exudates and what are they doing? Well, this is just some research that I highlighted because I liked the way that they told this story. And here you can see they're doing carbohydrates, flavanol. That's just a type of phytochemical. In other words, plants are making these phytochemicals, and they make a ton of them. Beta carotene is another one you're probably more familiar with. They're anthocyanins in berries. And then the other things on this list, the fatty acids and the proteins. So what are those things? They're meals for microbes. Microbes are consuming all of these exudates. Why would they do that? Well, because remember I talked about the symbiotic relationship. And if you're going to have a symbiotic relationship, it's, remember all that quid pro quo business last year? It's real, at least in the biology world. And it's where if you're gonna get something, you've got to give something, but it's transparent in that, the organisms involved know this and expect these things. And so it's what I call the biological bazaar. That is what is happening down there underneath our feet in the rhizosphere. What we've got here are fetching fungi. That's what I call them. Here they are, coating and swathing the root. And then here they go. They're way off my computer screen. They can go hundreds of feet, even more, miles, as you guys probably know. There's that one record fungal thing down in Oregon. I forget, it was some fantastic amount away from the plants that these fungi are going. And they're like miners and truckers. They're getting things way beyond the root system. Phosphorus is one of the most important things. And they're bringing it back and they're handing it over to the plant in exchange for exudates. So that's where those exudates are going out when something good shows up. The other thing that arrives at the root, at the doorstep of a plant, is courtesy of the bacterial world. And so bacteria, unlike fungi, they're kind of stuck in place. They can't be roaming around looking for things and bringing them back. So they're consuming these exudates, and in their tiny little one-celled bodies, they themselves are producing compounds and chemicals, otherwise called metabolites, sometimes known as waste byproducts. But I don't like that term at all, waste or byproduct, because it makes it sound like it's not important, right? But it's super important. These bacterial metabolites include things like plant growth promoting hormones. So that's right. Botanical world has farmed out this job of producing growth hormones to the microbes around its roots, because if the plant has this excess of exudates, it can feed all the bacteria out there in the soil, and then it can get this very otherwise energy intensive thing for it to make that the growth hormones. They can get the bacteria to make it and just keep feeding them exudates. So that's a pretty cool setup there. And it is indeed a biological bazaar. It is probably biologically speaking, one of the busiest places on Earth is the rhizosphere around a plant's roots. And how important are all of those exudates? A plant uses somewhere around 40% of the energy it makes through photosynthesis to manufacture all of these exudates. And the thing about the biological world is life forms, whether it's your body or a bacterium or a plant. We don't do things to just sort of toss energy out. Energy is used very judiciously and very carefully. And so for 40% of a plant's energy to be going toward these exudates, it tells you how important that is to the overall well-being and health of the plant. And I wanted to share this image with you because sometimes it's hard to picture, all of these microorganisms and their habitats and what they're doing. And so this is fungal hyphae that is cruising through the soil matrix, through these minerals, and they're getting stuff. This is where they're getting minerals. I'd mentioned phosphorus. They also will help with zinc. And so these are two things very, very important to the growth of plants. And in addition, this is really neat. These mycorrhizal fungi are inside of plant root cells. And and I'm sure some of you know far more than I do about the different kinds of mycorrhizal fungi, but they're either associating mostly with the outside of a plant root cell or on the inside. And just think about this for a minute. Maybe the best example that comes to mind is what's happening with our bodies should virus particles from COVID get inside. Our cells go berserk over that, right? The immune system is like, intruder, red alert. All this stuff happens and the virus gets kicked out. So in this case, a whole other kind of organism is living inside of a plant. And so this also tells you about how special these co-evolved relationships are between fungi and plants. Because this is, like I said, this is like one big sort of nutrient line from the fungi way out in the soil and transporting this stuff, because they want to get it right into the plant so they can get their exudates. And how much difference does it make if a plant can have a fully functioning normal relationship with mycorrhizal fungi? Well, these Japanese researchers a while back decided to do an experiment and figure that out. So this green box here tells us what we need to know. AM stands for arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi colonization. And you can see what we have here is with no colonization of fungi whatsoever, this is the amount of phosphorus that's taken up. This is micrograms per plant. But then look at this, you get about 100% colonization of mycorrhizal fungi, and the phosphorus uptake, boom, over 10 times that of an uncolonized plant. And only 87% colonization, a little less than 8 times the phosphorus uptake of an uncolonized plant. And so this is just more evidence of the importance of the plant microbiome around the root to what a plant is getting out of the deal, okay? And I wanted to just touch briefly, we're gonna go above ground here just for a second. Plants are also relying on what's happening below ground to help out their above ground parts. So in this case, what happens is you get an insect herbivore munching away on a leaf, and a plant has no giant fly swatter or anything like that. The only thing it has is its own green body, its ability to communicate with its root microbiome, and getting that root microbiome to manufacture compounds, chemicals that the plant takes back up that have a stimulatory effect on the plant immune system. And so when the plant immune system gets activated, it really interested in like killing the wants it off to some other plant, go off to some other unhealthy plant and leave me alone. And so that's another way in which the soil microbiota help out a plant. It's through these signaling and communication molecules and compounds that they're able to make. And so the point of all of this is to tell you, if you haven't gotten the idea already, there is just ceaseless, endless chatter and talk and communication between the root microbiome and its plant host. That brings me to something that I just want to correct for the record. We probably, I know you're mushroom people, but for a minute, put on your plant hat. And I imagine you've all seen a picture, something like this. And its purpose is to show you, here's the above ground part of the plant, and here's the below ground part of the plant. And whoever drew this thought the above ground part, wow, that's really important. This is fake news. That is not the case, right? All this stuff I've been going over with you, the rhizosphere and the root microbiota, not so. We know that the rhizosphere is very much a place, it's sort of the center, the headquarters, if you will, of plant intelligence, which makes what? That makes the root system and its microbiome really much like the brain of a plant. That's my point I want to get across here. The brain and brain food matters. So quick little quiz here. There's 3 treatments. One is composted manure, one is conventional fertilizers, and one is nothing at all. So I'll let you take all these different root systems. We're going to go to the answer, and brain food matters a lot. Look at this root system. I think this is pretty interesting. It's not a half bad root system. By the way, these are tomato plants. That's not half bad. I'd like to see, a few more roots, because I'm thinking roots, I think exudates, I think by microbes there in the soil. That middle slide, that sort of tells the whole story of conventional fertilizers. They definitely will make a plant grow. I'm sure we've all put nitrogen out on a plant and stood back and went, wow, look at what happened. But it's really only working for the above ground parts of a plant. It's not doing a whole lot for the microbes, especially the forms of nitrogen that are really rapidly either off of the soil, quickly to the plant. There's not much there for microbes to eat at all. But over here on the right-hand side, composted manure, that looks really nice to me. What I'm picturing here is we're getting the above ground, these larger forms of soil life that are taking the first run at that composted manure. So they're getting stuff to eat. They're turning it into smaller particulate matter. Other microbes are eating that. And eventually it all gets down to the root microbiome. And so the nematodes that eat the bacteria, they're well fed because the bacteria are having a lot of exudates to eat. And so it's this whole soil food web that is kept alive and maintained. And it's really like the plant's health insurance plan, because the microbiome does 2 basic things. It acquires these nutrients, but it also protects, it can physically protect the plant as well. That's why the brain food matters. And David and I talk about have diet. You can go, I just sort of demonstrated the fertilizer diet there. It looks really nice on top, pretty paltry down there. Why? You're getting tons of NPK on top. The problem is you're just not getting, with fertilizer diet, we're just not getting much in the way of these beneficial microbial metabolites. Over here, we call this soil health diet. Get a nice looking plant on top and you get a super root system down below, because it's getting all of these positive beneficial microbial metabolites. And so that brings me to what I always say about the soil. And I will say a normal, healthy soil, it's the greatest gut on earth, indeed. All right, I'm going to transition quickly and just move onto a little bit about the human microbiome. But before I do that, these are just a couple of 3 things really to keep in mind about regenerative practices. And they are, by drop your shovel, we're talking just minimize disturbance, keep the soil covered. We don't want it washing away. We don't want it eroding. We want it filled with food for microbiota. And we want to grow diversity because every single plant in my garden is producing different cocktails of exudates. And the more diverse your exudates are, the more diverse your root microbiome is. And what that means is resilience. If something were to take out a part of the root microbiome for some reason, a pathogen or something like that, that pathogen is not going to be able to, say, maybe affect these other types of species of fungi or bacteria. And it's sort of the power of diversity. You don't put all your eggs in one basket for one problem to come through and wipe everything out. Yes, so the human microbiome, indeed, we do have one. And most of our microbiome is not outside on the surface of our skin or our hair or our nose or something like that. It's down in the lower reaches of the digestive tract, actually in the colon. And what is very, very interesting about the human microbiome, this is a cross section through the human colon. And here at the top of the slide, that's inside the colon. So, picture the digestive tract. This is inside, okay? And that's where bacteria, and you'll love this, microbiome. That's right. It's not near as all of the bacteria in the human digestive tract, but there are fungi that are indigenous to the human body and a part of the human microbiome. We just don't know a lot about them. And what is happening in our gut with our microbiome is that perched on the, so here's your gut wall, perched on the outside of the gut wall is some 70 to 80% of the immune system. So that's pretty interesting. All wrapped around the gut, up and down, although mostly it's in the lower reaches. Our immune system. And so there's types of immune cell. And it's shown here. It can transit in between two cells lining the colon, and it's coming up here in the colon, and it's interacting and communicating with members of the microbiome. Because that immune cell wants to know, who are you? Are you friend or are you foe? Should I let you stay or should I make you go? And the immune system is all about surveillance, and we don't want any foes and we don't want any troublemakers. So the digestive tract and the microbial inhabitants are like an intelligence dossier for our microbiome. And depending on that intelligence, our immune system will fire up and get active, or it'll stand back and realize, yeah, everything is cool. Everything that's here should be here, nothing to see here, move along. And that's what you want. You want inflammation fires up, inflammation fires up. And that happens for too long, too many places in the body, and it can be a big, big problem. So you want really good intelligence and normal functioning with the human microbiome. And what do all these microbiota eat? They eat what you eat. And so that is everything from donuts to artichokes. But I will say this, that donut, those are really simple carbohydrates. And they actually never really make it down into the part of the digestive tract where most of the beneficial microbiota live. And the reason for that is that we have the enzymes to break down the simple sugars, and it gets moved out of our digestive tract fairly well, shortly after you've eaten it. And so this is part of why when people are talking about whole plant foods or fiber, this is the big reason that they also should be telling you about why diet rich in diverse kinds of fiber is really good for your microbiome, because this is what your microbiome is eating. So if you're not eating enough fiber, which is to say whole plant foods, there's getting fed. And I want to make a short aside here. Faux meat products that are made of plants, or you hear plant-based, those are not whole plant foods. Those foods have been deconstructed and put back together with things that actually were never a part of that whole plant food. And they really don't nourish the microbiome the way a whole plant food does. So what we have here is I just really want to show you how the number of bacteria increase as you descend down the digestive tract. They increase hugely by the time you get down to the colon. And indeed, this is another kind of biological bazaar down there. And if you're having trouble sort of picturing what that is looking like, that's shown here. These are bacteria colorized so that they're really easy to see. And they're rushing to the banquet table of fiber in the human gut because they thrive on it. And you always want to make sure, it's just like in the soil, malnourished or not enough to eat, and the microbiome dies off. And then it can't provide all of this super accurate intelligence to the immune system. And when that doesn't happen, the immune system is left kind of high and dry. Doesn't have all of the information it needs. And then it starts to behave inappropriately, autoimmune conditions, other types of chronic diseases, and so on. And of course, this is another form of communication and chatter. And I want to just emphasize this point about the metabolites that are made by the human microbiome deep down there in the colon. All of these different kinds of compounds and chemicals. This is mind-blowing. Some 30 to 50% of the compounds and molecules circulating right now in my body and my blood, and right now in yours, those compounds and molecules were not made by your body. They were made by your microbiome. And when you have normal functioning, well-fed, well-adjusted, I guess I would say, microbiome, it can really act a lot like your onboard medicine cabinet. That's sort of the bottom line on all of this microbiome stuff, is there's a number of very beneficial compounds that they produce that our bodies need and rely on. And of course, you knew this was coming, I hope, right? Our gut too is a place of intelligence. And diet, again, Dave and I talk about the gut health diet versus the Western diet. And the problem with the Western diet is that it's really rich in simple carbohydrates. And I'm not just talking like cookies and donuts here. This is stuff like white bread or soda. It's any part of a whole plant food that's been sort of basically stripped of its fiber. The rest of what's left there is sugars, which our brain loves, but all of those simple sugars, they pass out of the digestive tract, mid to lower reaches. Nothing ever reaches down here. And so what that means is that you have just a very small amount of these beneficial microbial metabolites in your gut. And you don't want that. You want a ton of them. You want a whole lot of them. And so with your gut health diet, it's not to say, oh, don't ever eat a donut, or for God's sakes, please have some birthday cake on your birthday, right? Or Christmas, Thanksgiving, and other holidays where, there's some really great desserts out there. But it is to say, also, just make sure you feed your microbiome every day. And so I really think, just like that garden outside, I think about the gut as a place to garden as well, because we have an ecosystem inside of us, and there's living organisms that need nutrients and nourishment and care, and they rely on us. They can't get up and walk out of our body. They are where they are. They're stuck there, and that's why it's important for us to all think about how do we take care of them. And this is just last couple of slides here, or maybe the last one here. There's some really interesting common ground between the root and the gut when it comes to microbiomes. I've been talking about the nutrients a lot, both those that fungi bring, those that bacteria bring into the plant root. Nutrients is probably a word too that ought to really be having an expanded kind of a definition if you think about how important some of the microbiome metabolites are. Oh, my other point here, microbial metabolites, very important in both systems. Immunity and defense rely heavily on the microbiome of the host, whether that's a plant, a person, a pig, a polar bear, a goldfish, a bird. Everything's got a microbiome. And the organism, the host organism, relies on its microinhabitants for health and well-being. And I think that this is really one of the grandest examples of intelligence that I can think of. It's this systems nested within systems, and there's the symbiosis and the exchanges and so on. And so it's been a lot to take in, I understand, but I want you to just remember this, because I think if you remember this, you're well on your way to, a healthy gut and healthy soil, and that is to mulch your soil inside and out. And I'll leave this up here while I turn off the mute and stop sharing. Here, if you would like to get in touch with David or I, here's the contact info. I meant to say too, these days, we have all our books. We're happy to provide folks with a copy. If they contact us, we can autograph it and send it off to you. Contact us for details on that. And I'm happy to take a couple of questions now. And okay.
Hey, that was
All right.
Great, Anna. Very nice.
Okay, great.
Will this talk be available so that you can look at it again?
Yeah.
How to do that?
Let's see, we should still be recording, although I don't see.
So I think the steps now are, when the recording stops, I'll get Anne to send me the file. I'll pass that on to David Ansley, and he'll put it up on the YouTube channel with the link from our website to see it.
Okay. Yeah, it looks to me like it's still recording, because that's the message I got. Is everybody unmuted who would like to be? It looks like I turned over the power to you all to do that.
Yeah.
Let's see, how do we want to handle, are there any questions out there, I guess?
I unmuted it, but I don't know.
Yep.
I would like to know your take on, you mentioned you use also biochar. And do you think that you need to charge the biochar with like worm castings or other compost teas and whatever, or can you also use the biochar and just mix it in your mulch?
Yeah, I already had ice cream.
Yeah. I don't think that's absolutely necessary, because as soon as biochar hits the soil, there's microbes in the soil. And if you have a halfway decent soil, they're going to get onto that biochar and start colonizing it. That said, I don't think there's anything wrong, and I think that it could be useful to inoculate your biochar. I mean, that'd be a great research project for, some graduate student to figure out. But I don't think it's necessary, and in some ways, I'm just kind of thinking out loud now. So the bacteria that are in a worm bin and that are decomposing all of that organic, that actually pretty high intensity organic matter, may well be different than the microbial communities in the soil or those that take up residence on a piece of biochar. So I'm kind of always in favor for having, I guess what I call, the native populations and species be colonizing and inoculating any new thing that's put into the soil.
Yeah.
But I mean, the good thing about organics, things like biochar and worm compost, there's little harm in experimenting. It's not like taking some chemical and you know, pouring a bottle of something somewhere and saying, I think I'll see what this is, you know, what's gonna happen here. Little is harmed when you're experimenting with organics, I think, in general.
And you were talking before about not turning the soil, and I think I might have missed a part, or the sound went out or something like that, but you were commenting you don't want to dig up and, you know, mix in with the bottom soil to prevent those microbes and organisms from getting destroyed, correct?
Yeah, that's basically right. I mean, if there's any farmers out there, what we're really looking for is no tillage. So we don't want
lasagna gardening.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And another thing, I had started doing lasagna type gardening a few years ago on an experiment. And I think that the reason back then we were using was it pulls up the old seeds and brings them to the top. So then they germinate and you get weeds and things like that. But I like that too.
Yeah, no, definitely. You've all done this. This has all happened. You go and disturb a piece of soil and then, oh, what are all these little plants that are now growing out here 7 or 10 days later? Oh, those are all the weed seeds. So
Yeah.
That's the other reason for a nice mulch layer is those seeds just eventually die and you never have to deal with them as weeds.
I have a question on a greater scale than a garden, and that is, why does the Forestry Service not force these people, instead of having to slash and burn, to have to chip all that stuff and leave it behind? It would improve the soil. It would create faster growing trees and all that. I don't know why they don't do that.
You know, that's a good question. I don't know either. The perhaps inconvenience be up into areas that are maybe hard to access, but if on the other hand, if you're doing logging, you've already got roads and vehicles and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it would. That's part of the problem with forestry is you go into an area, right, and then you log all the trees off, and that's robbing that soil of that organic matter that would eventually have dropped onto the top of the soil and eventually broken down. You're obviously also depriving soil microbiota of exudates because there's no living plant that's releasing exudates out into the soil after you pull a tree out. So, I mean, I think that'd be a very good idea to chip stuff up and try to leave it on site.
Well, if you look at the slash, it can sit there for years and years and years. It's about surface area, and if the bacteria and the insects and the mycelia can't get to it, it's just going to sit there, rubble.
Yeah, it'll just eventually that stuff will decompose, but it just takes a lot longer because you're dealing with a giant piece of wood as opposed to, you know, a wood chip, which separates in there really quick and start breaking it down. I think the other reason is just, you know, simply this: people are not thinking about soil as something that has health. And I think when you begin to think of the soil as something that has health, like a human body or your cat or your dog, you really start to think about things, I think, completely differently. It's not just this inert media that a plant is sitting in. You know, it's this living ecosystem that is really of the plant body. And this is exactly what, you know, Suzanne Simard up at UBC with all of the mycorrhizal fungi work that she's done and showing the relationship between fungi and forests has really brought to light.
I was when you were talking about the root systems for conventional fertilizers versus composting on the top, I was thinking about that saying, give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. So, and it was kind of funny because I had seen something like this a few years ago at a gardening thing. So you provide him what he needs and he never reaches out to look. But if you teach him to fish, like he goes out there and give him something, a healthy environment, if you weren't there, he would continue to live,
Right.
or the plant, meaning he.
Yeah, yeah. Right. So, yeah, so I guess your analogy there, I never thought about it that way. So, and the NPK diet is sort of one where you're never teaching the plant to go fishing, so to speak. You're never teaching exudates and root growth and symbioses. If you get the NPK meal day in, day out, you let a plant be a plant and start creating symbiotic relationships. And it's like, wow, there's no end to this if we just allow these processes to function. Yeah, that's a good analogy. I like that. Go ahead. I was going to open up the chat. I just noticed that over there, and it looks like there's a couple things. Can I, let me see if I can take a look at these. Okay, we got that forestry work and the slash and burn. Okay.
Yeah. You got it. You got it.
Okay.
Where can
Yeah,
you
I love biology too. Where can you buy biochar? You just Google that up on the interwebs. I know that we're fortunate in this part of the country because we have a lot of things we can turn into biochar. There's a lot of places and people that are doing this. So I don't know of anybody in particular, but if especially out in the peninsula,
Yeah.
I'd be really surprised if you couldn't find somebody. But make sure that you ask them, what are you using as your source to make the biochar? I generally like to not be using weird things like, rubber tires or crap like that. You don't want any of that. Okay. You want some kind of dead woody material that got turned into the biochar.
I just posted a link on chat for
Cool.
where you get biochar for free.
Oh man, you guys better hop on that.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, biochar for free, great. Okay, so looks like we're caught up on the chat, and Kristen, or you let me know when your meeting normally ends. Maybe we're beyond that, or I don't know, but I'm happy to do like maybe another question or two.
I can't help but wonder, since you have such really good luck with all of the plants that you grow, what do you do with infestations of insects?
Aha, yeah, because they're
Just
out
curious
there.
about how you operate. Yeah.
Yeah, they're out there, and we know they're out there. So if I get something really ugly, and I'll describe this because I'm sure you've all had something like this. It'll be aphids. Aphids seem to, I have no idea where they're coming from, but one day my kale plant is happy and healthy, and the next day I look on little tiny new shoot coming up, and it is coated with aphids, exactly the color of the kale tissue. And I will do a hand smash with aphids. Now, I'm not dealing with acres and acres of kale. I'm dealing with, a garden bed size of kale. So it's feasible for me to go around and look, where are there any more aphids? Because where there's one, there's more. And I will smash, and I will stay on top of my smash routine for a good 2 or 3 days. And that can sometimes take care of the system. If the plant is unhealthy, and the aphids know this, they will go to the unhealthy one. And if I don't feel like smashing aphids, and I don't feel like I want those aphids jumping from a sick plant to say, seeing if they can, get a leg up on a healthy plant, I will cut the part of the plant off that has the aphids, and I will take it over to the yard waste bin, and I will smash the aphids over the yard waste bin, smash the plant, and put the whole bloody thing in there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you tell how much I like aphids. They could just devastate, a plant. I find them from time to time on my roses as well. And if you can just get ahead of the population increase of any insect pest, you usually can knock them back to either a tolerable level or numbers that are so low that it's not really bothering the plant. The other problem I've had from time to time is weevils. These are the hard-bodied insects, crawl out of the mulch and soil, upper layer of soil at night. They start eating these notches out of your leaves. That is weevil damage. And the only way that I've been able to control that is I will immediately lighten up on the amount of mulch around the affected plant, because the weevils are they're real chewer and chompers. They've got a nice set of jaws on them, right? They're eating your plant up. They're partly thriving on this mulch. The really woody mulch is what I've found weevils in. So I'll lighten up on the mulch. I'd say they're not as big a problem as they used to be, but initially they were. I think those are the two things that sort of come to mind as the most bothersome, troublesome pests for me around here.
Yeah, the weevils are really, really tough.
Yeah. You gotta, I've tried, predatory nematodes and things like that. What you really want somehow is, I always figure, okay, if I've got weevils, maybe what I need to be thinking about is some kind of a liquid elixir that can get down into the soil that will sort of be a supplement to the exudates that the plant is putting out there. So I'm thinking something's wrong. The plant immune system is not getting stimulated enough to kick these weevils away. So maybe I'll try to feed the microbiota, and that could stimulate the plant's immune system to push back on the weevil.
What about grinding up the weevils and putting them in liquid and pouring it on the plant?
I'm sorry, could you say, I didn't hear that.
Collecting the weevils and grinding them up in water and spreading them around the base plant. Some people
Yeah, I think, did you say collecting the weevils and grinding them up and then putting it back out, the ground up weevils?
Yeah.
Yeah, I never thought about that. I can't think of it in the pest that wants to.
Now your voice is broken up, Anne.
Through these of its comrades. So I will do answers late at night, and I will see them on leaves, and I have put a big dent in weevil populations that way.
Right.
Another thing that's coming around here soon in spring is
You're breaking up now totally.
these
We can't hear you anymore.
These big late night, have a glass of wine.
I may be wrong, but I think the treble is giving your microphone trouble. That's what I've been hearing.
Huh. Something weird.
Yeah, it did. It seems strange that when your voice goes higher and louder, that it just like it overloads, and so I think a lower pitch might stop part of the problem, but I don't know. That sounds odd. I don't know why it would work electronically.
The video feed is also frozen.
Yeah, her internet connection died and she's no longer on the call.
Yeah,
Okay.
she was frozen for a bit. She's gone now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. This is good. This is
Yeah.
wonderful.
Too bad. John, can you stop the recording?